Hello, curious minds, and welcome to this intellectual journey. Today we're taking on a giant, a name everyone thinks they know, but few have truly explored. We're talking about Adam Smith, a man whose shadow looms over every market, every economic policy, and indeed over our modern way of life. When we hear Adam Smith, we often think capitalism, greed, self-interest. We imagine an invisible hand that magically fixes everything. But what if I told you that this is a dangerous caricature? What if the real Smith was first and foremost a profound moral philosopher, more concerned with ethics than with wealth? The big question this essay asks is, who is Adam Smith really? To find the answer, we must separate the man from the myth. We're going to deconstruct the ideas that founded modern economics, but we're also going to salvage the part the world decided to forget. Get ready, because this journey will change our perspective on the present. Understanding Smith isn't some dusty academic exercise. It's about understanding the very root of the system we live in. It's about asking ourselves if self-interest is the same as selfishness. It's about questioning whether markets truly function without a moral foundation. What we'll discover directly impacts us, right here, right now. So grab your coffee, get comfortable. We're going to travel back to 18th century Scotland, to the heart of the Enlightenment, to meet the true Adam Smith. And I promise you, by the end, you'll never look at a simple commercial exchange the same way again. Let's begin this deep dive. Before we dive in, a quick note. To bring this narrative to life, I've used AI tools to generate the images you see. Think of them as a canvas, a way to illustrate the ideas and the atmosphere of our story. They won't always be a literal representation, but rather a visual companion to let your imagination soar with me. I truly hope you enjoy it. To understand the wealth of nations, you first have to understand the man. Adam Smith was born in 1723 in Kirkcaldy, a small coastal town in Scotland. His father died before he was born. He was raised by his mother, and their relationship was fundamental throughout his life. This humble beginning forged him into a keen observer of everyday life. He lived during a time of intellectual effervescence, the Scottish Enlightenment. Smith wasn't alone. He was a close friend of the great philosopher David Hume. He rubbed shoulders with thinkers like Francis Hutcheson. This wasn't an economist in an ivory tower. He was a philosopher at the epicenter of an intellectual earthquake that was changing the world. Smith was an academic. He studied in Glasgow and then at Oxford, where, interestingly, he was disappointed by the quality of the teaching. He was a man of books, a pure intellectual, but also an incredibly keen observer of human nature and of the streets, the markets, the ports. He saw how people truly behaved. His intellectual biography is key. Before he was the father of economics, he was a professor of logic and, more importantly, a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Glasgow. His first chair defined his worldview. For him, economics was never separate from ethics, psychology, and justice. He tutored the young Duke of Buccleuch, which led him on a long journey across Europe, particularly France. There he met great thinkers of the French Enlightenment, like Voltaire and the physiocrats, such as Quinet. This trip was his economic fieldwork, observing different systems and sharpening his ideas. This context is vital. Smith didn't write in a vacuum. He wrote against a dominant system. The system reigning in Europe at the time was mercantilism, the idea that a nation's wealth was measured by the amount of gold and silver it accumulated. To be rich, one had to export a lot and import little. Trade was seen as a zero-sum game. Mercantilism promoted monopolies, sky-high tariffs, and constant government intervention in the economy. The state told people what to produce, whom to sell to, and what they couldn't buy. Smith saw this and thought it was inefficient, unjust, and most importantly, based on a fundamentally flawed idea of what wealth is. Furthermore, he was witnessing the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. He saw new machines, new ways of organizing work in workshops and small factories. He saw productivity beginning to take off. His brilliant mind connected the dots. He saw that something new was being born and needed a theory to explain it. So, when Smith sat down to write, he had two goals. First, to demolish the antiquated mercantilist theory. Second, to offer a new vision of what wealth is and how it's created. And his answer isn't gold. A nation's wealth, for Smith, is the annual flow of goods and services it produces. A revolutionary idea. Now that we understand the man and his time, we're ready to delve into his first great work. And no, it's not the one you're thinking of. Before wealth, Smith wanted to understand morality. Let's dive into the book that, for many, is his forgotten masterpiece. Long before he was an economist, Smith was a philosopher, and his first great work, published in 1759, wasn't about money. It was The Theory of Moral Sentiments. This book is the missing key to understanding all his thought. For Smith, morality doesn't come from God or pure reason, but from our social nature. The book asks, how can we be creatures so interested in ourselves and yet at the same time be capable of virtue, generosity, and justice? Smith doesn't see a contradiction. He starts with a simple fact of human nature, something we all experience. He calls it sympathy. The central concept of this book is sympathy, which today we would call empathy. Smith argues that we are inherently social beings. We can't help but feel something of what others feel. We imagine ourselves in their place. This putting ourselves in someone else's shoes is, for Smith, the glue that holds society together. Smith says we desire two things: to be loved and to be lovable, worthy of being loved. We don't just want people to applaud us, we want to deserve that applause. We seek the approval of others, and that leads us to moderate our actions. We learn to control our self-centeredness because we want to fit in with the group. But how do we know if our behavior is truly lovable or worthy of approval? Smith introduces a brilliant psychological tool here, the impartial spectator. He says that to judge ourselves, we divide ourselves into two: the I that acts and an internal spectator that judges that action. This impartial spectator is our conscience. It's an internalized version of society. Before acting, we ask ourselves, what would a fair and well-informed observer think about this? This mechanism, developed through sympathy, is what allows us to create moral rules and live together without killing each other. Think about it. Smith is describing in 1759 how morality is a social product. It emerges from human interaction. It's not imposed from above, but built from below through millions of daily interactions where we use sympathy and consult our impartial spectator. Ethics is an emergent phenomenon. This is fundamental. Adam Smith's human being isn't a selfish atom. It's a deeply social being whose identity and morality depend completely on others. We need others to know who we are. The I is built within the we. And virtue for Smith isn't some grand sacrifice. Virtue is prudence, justice, and benevolence. It's the behavior the impartial spectator would approve of. It's the middle ground. It's being a reliable and decent member of the community. It's the foundation of trust, and without trust there is no society. So why have we forgotten this, Adam Smith? Because it's easier to take his second work and simplify it. But that's the great tragedy. The Wealth of Nations makes no sense without the theory of moral sentiments. The market Smith describes only functions because it assumes participants are these moral beings. Smith's capitalist isn't a greedy psychopath. They are a person who has internalized the impartial spectator. They understand that to succeed in the long term, they need a reputation for fairness and trustworthiness. The baker doesn't poison you not just out of fear of the law, but out of respect for social morality. This moral foundation is the ground upon which Smith's entire economic system is built. To remove this foundation, as was done in the 20th century, is to build a skyscraper without foundations. It's a total distortion of his thought. The rational, selfish Homo economicus is a later invention, not Adam Smith's creature. Smith was a realist. He knew people weren't perfect. He knew about selfishness and vanity, but his moral system of sympathy and the impartial spectator is how society naturally manages and channels those passions. It doesn't eliminate them, but it refines them, making them socially useful. Hold on to that idea. The human being is social and moral before entering the market. Now, with this firm foundation, let's fast forward 17 years to 1776. The work that would change the world forever, The Wealth of Nations. As we mentioned, Smith wrote in a world dominated by mercantilism, which saw wealth as gold and trade as war. Smith sets out to demolish this idea. The Wealth of Nations is, in essence, a 900-page argument for economic liberty and free trade. The full title is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. The question is, what makes one country rich and another poor? Smith's answer isn't its gold, isn't its government, isn't its army. The answer for Smith is its productivity, its capacity to produce more goods and services per person. And where does that productivity come from? Here we get to the heart of his economic analysis. It doesn't come from government regulation. It doesn't come from generosity. It comes from a simple principle he observes in daily work. The first chapter of the book makes it clear. Let's fast forward to 1776, the year of the American Revolution and the publication of his magnum opus, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. The book opens with a concept that seems simple but is revolutionary: the division of labor. And it gives us an example that has gone down in history: the pin factory. Smith observes that a single worker, untrained, could barely make 1 pin a day. But if the work is divided into 18 distinct operations where one man draws out the wire, another straightens it, another cuts it, and so on, 10 men could produce 48,000 pins a day. Why this exponential increase in productivity? Smith gives 3 reasons. First, specialization. The worker who does only one thing becomes incredibly skilled at it. Second, saving time. No time is lost switching from one task to another. Third, innovation. The worker focused on a single task is more likely to invent machines that make it easier. The division of labor is the engine of economic growth. It's what allows a society to produce a massive surplus of goods. And this surplus for Smith is the true wealth of nations. It's not the king's gold, it's the ability of ordinary people to access more goods and services. But the division of labor has a limit. It depends on the size of the market. In a small town, you can't just be a pin maker because there isn't enough demand. You have to be a blacksmith, a carpenter, and a dentist. Only in a large city or with access to international trade can you truly specialize. That's why Smith is such a fierce advocate for free trade. Free trade expands the market to the size of the world. It allows Scotland to specialize in what it does well and exchange it for the wine France does well. Both nations benefit. Trade isn't a zero-sum game, it's a positive-sum game. This idea, so common today, was revolutionary in 1776. It directly attacked mercantilism, which sought to restrict trade. Smith says, no, let people trade freely, let the market expand. That, and not regulation, is what will bring prosperity. It's an argument for liberty, but here Smith, the moral philosopher, reappears. He wasn't a blind fanatic of the division of labor. In Book 5 of The Wealth of Nations, he warns about its dark side. He warns that a man who spends his entire life performing a few simple operations becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. This is alienation. Smith saw it coming. The worker becomes mentally dulled, loses the capacity to exercise judgment, becomes less capable of being a good citizen. It's a devastating critique, and it comes from the father of capitalism. And what is his solution to this problem? It's not to abolish the division of labor, because that would throw us back into poverty. His solution is public education. Smith was one of the first and strongest advocates for the state providing little schools in every parish so that common people could learn to read, write, and account. Education was the antidote to the dehumanizing effects of specialization. It was the way to ensure that even in an industrial society, citizens maintained their mental sharpness, their human dignity, and their moral capacity. Economics, once again, was at the service of morality. All right, we have the division of labor as the engine of wealth. But what drives people to participate in this system? What motivates the baker, the butcher, and the brewer to provide us with our dinner? Here we arrive at another fundamental concept, self-interest. This is where he's most misunderstood. Smith says, in one of his most famous lines, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest." Many people read this and cry out, greed? Selfishness. But they miss the point entirely. Smith isn't saying the baker is a greedy, evil being. He's making a much deeper psychological observation, one that connects directly to his theory of moral sentiments. Smith's point is that we cannot depend on the benevolence of strangers to survive. In a small town, you might know everyone, but in a large city, you deal with hundreds of people. You can't expect the baker to give you bread purely out of friendship. He has his own family to feed. The self-interest Smith speaks of isn't greed. It is rather the desire to improve one's own life, the desire to be respected, the desire to care for one's own. It's the same motivation that in his first book leads us to seek to be lovable and worthy of respect. It's self-regard, not selfishness. The full quote clarifies it. He says, "We address ourselves not to their humanity but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities but of their advantages." The market exchange is an act of persuasion. It's a social act. It's appealing to the other's sympathy. If you give me the bread you have to spare, I will give you the money you need. It's the recognition that the best way to get what you want is to help others get what they want. It's a system based on mutual consent and mutual benefit. In Smith's system, the only way to legitimately become wealthy is by serving others. You have to produce something people voluntarily value. So Smith's self-interest is completely integrated with his sympathy. A successful entrepreneur is one who has enough sympathy to imagine what customers desire even before they know it themselves. It's an act of commercial empathy. Self-interest, far from being amoral, is channeled by the moral and social system. And now we arrive at the most famous and most distorted concept of all, the invisible hand. It's crucial to understand this. Smith uses this phrase only 3 times in all his works. Once in The Wealth of Nations. It wasn't the central pillar of his theory, but a powerful metaphor to describe an unintended outcome. People often believe the invisible hand means markets regulate themselves or that greed is good. It means none of that. It's a description of how individual actions, motivated by self-interest, can lead to a beneficial social order that nobody intentionally planned or sought. It's a concept about spontaneous order. It's like language. Nobody invented the English language. It evolved. It grew from millions of people trying to communicate In the same way, the market for Smith is an emergent order. It's not designed by a king or a central planner. The specific context where he uses the phrase is about investment. Smith says that an entrepreneur, fearing the risks of foreign ventures, will prefer to invest his capital in his own country, in domestic industry. He does this to increase his own security and profit, not to help his country. But in doing this, by investing locally, he unintentionally maximizes the production of his own nation. Smith writes, by pursuing his own interest, the entrepreneur frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. That is the invisible hand. It's a metaphor for the unintended positive results of human action. It's not a mystical market deity. It's an observation about social complexity. It's a dose of humility against the central planner who believes they can design everything. Smith, in fact, deeply distrusted people who affected to trade for the public good. He preferred the honest entrepreneur who admitted they sought their own interest, but did so by serving others. It was more predictable and paradoxically more beneficial for society. The invisible hand isn't a guarantee. It doesn't mean that every self-interest leads to the common good. Smith was full of examples of how entrepreneurs conspire to raise prices or deceive the public. The invisible hand only works under specific conditions, and those conditions are crucial. What are those conditions? Competition. The invisible hand only works if there's competition. If there's a monopoly, the monopolist's self-interest, charging sky-high prices, does not benefit the public. That's why Smith hated monopolies, especially those granted by the government. The other condition is justice. The system only works if there's a rule of law, if contracts are respected, if there's no theft or fraud. This is where we reintroduce the state. Because, contrary to myth, Adam Smith was not an anarchist. He didn't believe in absolute laissez-faire. The term laissez-faire, meaning let do, is associated with Smith, but he used it with great caution. The modern myth paints him as someone who wanted to eliminate government entirely. This is radically false. The moral philosopher knew that a free market cannot exist in a moral or legal vacuum. Smith assigns the government or the sovereign 3 fundamental duties. The first is national defense, to protect society from the violence and invasion of other societies. A professional army? The second duty is the administration of justice, to protect every member of society from the injustice and oppression of any other member. This means a system of courts, judges, and police, the rule of law. Without this, there is no property, no contracts, and trade collapses. And then comes the third duty, the most interesting. It's the obligation to erect and maintain certain public works and public institutions which will never be in the interest of an individual or a small group of individuals, because the benefit is so diffused that the investment cannot be recovered. And what does Smith include in this category? Things that today would sound very social to us. He includes roads, bridges, canals, harbors. And as we already saw, public education. Smith understood that the market on its own would not provide these essential public goods for the prosperity of all. Smith was also deeply skeptical of power, especially the power of businessmen. He has very harsh words against them. He says that people of the same trade seldom meet together, even for merriment and diversion, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public or in some contrivance to raise prices. Therefore, Smith's system is not one of no government. It's one of a limited but strong government in its essential functions. A government that acts as an impartial arbiter, enforcing the rules of the game, justice, and providing the public goods that the market cannot. A government that protects the public from monopolies. So how did this complex, nuanced, and moral thinker become the patron saint of selfishness and wild capitalism? Here we enter the realm of distortions. The first is the so-called Das Adam Smith problem, a term coined in Germany. This problem posits that the Smith of the theory of moral sentiments, based on sympathy, is contradictory to the Smith of the wealth of nations, based on self-interest, as if he had undergone a personality change. But as we've seen, this is a superficial reading. There's no contradiction. The two books are two sides of the same coin. They describe the same human being in two different contexts. Moral sentiments describes how we form our ethics in our personal and social relationships. The wealth of nations describes how we act in the market, in the impersonal sphere. We act out of self-interest in the market precisely because we cannot depend on the benevolence of thousands of strangers. But that self-interest is always constrained by the laws of justice and the moral norms we learned through sympathy and the impartial spectator. One book is the moral foundation for the other. The second distortion is the oversimplification of the invisible hand. In the 20th century, economists from the Chicago School and politicians took this metaphor and turned it into a dogma. They used it to argue that any government intervention in the market is bad, that markets are perfect and should always be left alone. This is a caricature. Smith himself, as we saw, advocated for public education, banking regulation, yes he did, and infrastructure provision. He distrusted businessmen and hated monopolies. To use Smith to defend monopolies or crony capitalism is a betrayal of his thought. We've reached the end of our journey. We've deconstructed the myth of Adam Smith. We've seen that he wasn't the high priest of greed, but a profound moral philosopher attempting to understand how society can prosper in a commercial world. We discovered that his system is based on sympathy and the impartial spectator, creating moral beings. We saw that the division of labor creates wealth, but that its antidote, public education, is necessary to protect our humanity. We learned that self-interest isn't selfishness, but the engine of voluntary social cooperation in a world of strangers. And that the invisible hand isn't magic, but a metaphor for spontaneous order and unintended outcomes. An argument for humility and against the arrogance of the planner. The real Adam Smith is far more radical, complex, and human than the cardboard cutout we've been sold. He is a thinker for our time, a time grappling with the relationship between markets and morality, between the individual and the community, between wealth and virtue. Perhaps Smith's greatest lesson is that economics cannot be separated from ethics. A market system is only sustainable if it rests on a foundation of trust, justice, and virtue cultivated in us through our social nature. The next time you hear someone use Adam Smith to justify rampant greed or a market without rules, you'll know that person hasn't read the real Smith. The philosopher of sympathy, the critic of monopolies, the advocate for public education. In a world desperately needing a more human, moral, and sustainable capitalism, perhaps the best place to start isn't inventing something new, but rediscovering the complete and profound wisdom of the founding father, the true Adam Smith. His thought isn't an instruction manual, but a mirror. It forces us to ask, have we built a system that honors the impartial spectator? Or have we created a world where self-interest has completely divorced itself from sympathy? The answer defines our present. Thank you truly for joining me on this deep dive. I hope this journey through Adam Smith's thought has been as revealing for you as it is for me. Understanding these giants isn't just history, it's understanding the tools with which we build and sometimes destroy our present. If this deconstruction of ideas has brought you value, consider subscribing to the channel. And now I ask you, what idea about Adam Smith struck you the most? His moralistic side or the true meaning of the invisible hand? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you on the next intellectual journey.